All these raspberry canes can look intimidating, but they're actually really easy to handle. Guten gardening, everybody! We have multiple varieties of raspberries here at Guten Gardening. Some of them, like our black raspberry that you can see behind me, and actually it's all around me right now, that's a summer-bearing raspberry, and the harvest for that summer-bearing raspberry is already done. And some of our raspberries, like our heritage red raspberry, are fall-bearing raspberries. Now they've already given us some fruit, although there's still some ripe on the floricanes, the second-year canes, but they're still going to provide us a further harvest on the primocanes a little bit later in the season. Well, what we need to do in order to control our plants, and these primocanes, these first-year canes, are spreading everywhere, and we want to get them trellised, we need to go in and prune the canes that are no longer going to provide us with fruit. And we can do that with both our summer-bearing and our fall-bearing raspberries at this point. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to go ahead and manage your raspberry bushes so that you don't have them spreading anywhere you don't want them to, but also so that you can make them nice and clean and have a better harvest next season. Now we do have some additional raspberry content, and we'll link some of those videos in the description below so you can check out some of our other videos on fall bearing versus summer bearing raspberries, etc. But I'm not going to make any assumptions about your knowledge of raspberry canes. I'm going to explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it, and you're going to see the transformation and what's going to help us have another massive harvest next season. And I say another massive harvest because before I went on vacation a couple of weeks ago, I did a big black raspberry harvest here, and out of just 3 plants, I harvested nearly 6 pounds of delicious black raspberries. So let me go ahead and show you how I'm going to take care of these raspberry plants. First, regardless of the type of raspberry plant that you're growing, the first year cane is called the primocane. And for summer-bearing raspberries like this black raspberry, there are no fruit that grow on the primocane. Instead, they grow the second year on what we call the floricane. And you can tell the difference between a primocane and a floricane because the primocane will be green, while the floricane is a brown color. There's a pretty stark difference between the two. So the floricanes are where we get our fruit for summer-bearing raspberries. And once they've fruited, once we've already harvested the fruit off of these brown canes, they can go right away. And you can see similarly for our fall-bearing raspberries here, our heritage red raspberry, the primocane is green, the floricane is that brown color. Now the difference is that the primocane for a fall-bearing raspberry will produce fruit later in the season at the very ends of the cane. And for a fall-bearing raspberry, the floricanes will also produce fruit that second year. So the primary difference between the summer-bearing and the fall-bearing is that the summer-bearing won't produce any fruit on that first year cane. The fall bearing produces it at the very end, and then once that's produced, we cut back the ends of the fall bearing, and that second year is where you get this floricane that produces fruit the rest of the way back down. So after we've seen production on the floricanes for both of these, the second year canes, we can go ahead and cut them back, whether we're talking about the fall bearing or the summer bearing. To show you exactly what I mean, here's the primocane for our heritage red raspberry. You see there at the very end? That's where we're going to get raspberries later in the season, and then once they've fruited, we'll go ahead and cut this off at the point where the fruiting has stopped, and all the rest of the way down next season, that's where we'll get our main crop of heritage red raspberries. Now, if I were to approach this by starting at the ends, and you can see that this summer-bearing raspberry grows really long, thin canes that go out probably 12 or 13 feet from the plant. If I were to approach this by trying to start at the ends here and cutting my way back, that would seem a little bit more overwhelming. Instead, I'm going to go down to the base of this plant where I can see the difference. I'll see those green primocanes, the first year canes. Prime means 1, first year, and I'll see the reddish brown floricanes, and I can start cutting down there all the way at the bottom because I'm going to want to cut them down the whole way anyway. And so I'll start at the bottom, and it'll seem a lot less overwhelming. I'll just have to work my way through as I'm pulling the whole cane out after I've snipped them off at the bottom. Can you see how easy it is to tell the difference between the two types of canes? I mean, it's pretty clear which ones are that nice vibrant green and which ones are that darker reddish brown. Now this is going to be the case again, whether we're talking about fall bearing or summer bearing. Once I've harvested off of that floricane, there's not going to be any more production. That's when I go in and I cut it as close back to the plant as possible. Now, I sometimes talk about when I'm going to wear gloves in the garden, which isn't all that often, but when I'm working with raspberries, except our golden raspberry, which doesn't have any thorns, when I'm working with raspberries, typically I wear gloves because these bite. All right, come on in close and I'll show you how we cut it back. All right, first of all, make sure you have a really nice sharp pair of pruners. That makes this job so much easier. And then you're just picking all of the darker canes, and I've already come through and I've started cutting these out. It's such a simple process when you're down here at the bottom. That's a key. It's so much easier to prune down here, to get in here. And remember, I'm only doing this after I've had my harvest, after I've harvested everything off those floricanes. Now, all of these floricanes have been loosed from the bottom. I'm gonna have to work them out. I'm gonna protect the primocane as I do that. I'm gonna try not to disturb it all that much, but you'll notice that these canes for our summer bearing, they're longer. It's a very different style of cane from our fall bearing, but they're wrapped into the trellising and they produced fruit the whole way along that floricane. And each of these canes has a whole bunch of additional lateral stems coming off of the main cane. And the reason they have all those additional stems and they produced berries off of them is because once we went ahead and situated the primocanes last season when we pruned, we cut off the end to allow time for those to develop. It's like you cut off the apical end of a lot of plants and they become bushier. And that's the case for these raspberry canes. If you cut off the apical end, the end where it's growing from, instead of continuing to grow longer, it grows bushier and you get better production. Let's go ahead and clear out these floricanes and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Now, pruning these might feel a little bit weird because there's still likely going to be some green growth on these floricanes for these summer bearing raspberries, but I promise you're not going to get any more berries out of them. So unless you wait till the end of the season and there's no more green growth, it's absolutely fine. But we don't want to delay because again, we want to set up our plant for success for next season. Well, what an absolute difference 5 minutes of pruning makes. I mean, this plant looks nothing like it did before. All these floricanes are now gone, and now I have to train this plant for next season. So I'm going to show you how I put it up against the trellis and how I trim it. As far as all the material, the canes that I just cut off of here, it's up to you what you do with it, but I like to mow it into small pieces and put it in our compost. Now, when it comes to training up these raspberries along the trellis here, typically what I do is create what I call a fanned out effect. I just try to layer them from top to bottom just to give them plenty of room to grow. And I attach them to the trellising. We've used string in the past, that's fine. I found zip ties are a little bit easier to work with. They're just easier to attach overall. That's been our experience. But once I've got this fanned out the way you see it here, that's when, and this is only for our summer bearing raspberries, that's when I'm going to come in and cut off that apical end. And really, when I say cutting off the end, you really only have to cut off the last inch or two in order for this to work. I would say it would only take a week or so for us to start seeing some really good development back along these canes. That doesn't even look like the same plant at all, does it? And that's going to create a really healthy and productive plant for next season. Now let me show you what I'm going to do with our fall bearing raspberries. Now, our experience with fall bearing raspberries, and we do have a couple of different fall bearing varieties here, but they tend to be more of a bush-like raspberry plant versus the summer bearing varieties we have, which are longer canes. So these canes grow a little bit differently. One, because the primocanes are going to provide us with a crop later in the season at the ends of those first year canes for our fall bearing, we don't cut them off until after they've fruited. I didn't worry about that with the summer bearing raspberries because they don't provide us a fruit at all on the primocanes. So keep that in mind. I'm not going to cut the ends off of these primocanes again until they've fruited. But besides that, once we've gone ahead and seen the fruit happen, and here's a floricane right beside me, a second year cane. Once we've seen it fruit, And there are a couple of these left on here, and a couple more that still have to ripen. I'm gonna find a cane, I'm gonna find a floricane that has already finished fruiting, but we're doing the same exact process for these. If it's already produced fruit on that floricane, we're gonna go underneath the plant and we're gonna cut that cane off as low down as we can. You see how easy it is to tell the difference still. It doesn't matter the variety. The primocanes have that bright green, the floricanes have that reddish brown color. Even from far away, you can look back in here and you can see the difference in terms of the colors of the cane. So it makes it super easy to know. Sometimes I've found, because the leaves are still growing there at the ends, if you're trying to prune back at this time of the year, if you just start at the end, you might get confused a little bit. I still think they're pretty obvious which ones are which, but to remove confusion, go to the base of the raspberry plant. Hey, can you spot the granddaddy long leg? What do you call that spider where you are? All right, I found one of the floricanes that is not going to produce anymore. I'm going to follow it down to the bottom. We're going to go ahead and cut this one off. Well, I thought I had found one that had finished fruiting all the way, but you know, again, the fall bearing tends to provide us fruit a little bit later in the season. There were a couple of raspberries still on here, but no worries. It's worth it to show you how we prune. We're going to cut them off just like this, and just like our summer bearing, we're going to use those canes in our compost. And that's going to clear this area out really well. Now, because these grow in a more bush-like pattern, we don't have to train them against the trellis, but we still use a trellis because we usually wrap some string around the taller canes so they don't fall over. And we use that to support them as they grow during the season. But there's less training involved. I'm not trying to do a comparison to say you should get this one or you should get that one. We love all of our varieties. They have different tastes, and that's one of the things that makes raspberries so nice, is that there are so many different varieties. You will not get a first year crop unless you have a fall bearing raspberry. It will be the second year for all of these summer bearing raspberries because, again, it won't be on the primocane. So just keep that in mind. Don't think something's wrong if you didn't get raspberries right away. And if it is a fall bearing raspberry plant, you're only going to get a small crop because it's just the ends of those first year canes. Our fall bearing, I still got some to harvest off of here, so I'm not quite ready to thin them the whole way back, but you're going to see a noticeable difference when you prune them. It's going to make your life so much easier. I hope this video was informational for you. We love growing raspberries here. It's one of our favorite berries here at Guten Gardening, and we want other people to be encouraged and not to be intimidated by the plant. If there's something I missed in this video, some information you need that I didn't provide, please leave us a comment and let us know. If you have a favorite raspberry variety that you love to grow, let us know that as well in the comments. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.